Hi, and welcome to the Urban Tech VC, a podcast for urban leaders shaping the cities of tomorrow. If you love our show, do drop us a review, share it with your friends, and follow 2BX on LinkedIn or Instagram. Today, we're happy to welcome you to Tanja, an urban planner and researcher with a focus on long-term strategic planning, spatial-economic development, and questions around the social vitality of cities. The last few years, she has worked for the Municipality of Amsterdam in the R&D department, with the most important work being the Metropolitan Plan Amsterdam 2050. She is currently working on a strategy for innovation districts and developing research on the topic of vital neighbourhoods. We talked with Tanja about urban challenges and the stakeholders' involvement needed to solve them. We even learned that some municipalities have a CTO, a Chief Technology Officer. If you're an urban tech founder about to raise a round, do reach out to us. We'd love to connect and see if we should play together.
Hi, Tanja. Welcome to the show. Thank you for taking the time to talking to us here at the Urban Tech VC.
Hi, nice to be here, and thanks for the great invite. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to the talk with you guys.
You know, at the Urban Tech VC podcast and our fund, 2BX, everything is connected to technologies that change the way we live in and interact with urban areas. So the first important question is, what role do you play as expert for urban planning in that? And how did you end up being where you are? And perhaps who you are?
Yeah, maybe to start from the beginning. So for me, it was always impressive, like how cities work. And I saw that they are kind of like the spatial manifestation of societies. So they reflect a lot of political decisions, power relations, but also like big transformation and challenges that societies are facing. And especially in the European context, cities are kind of the expression of the democratic process and the cooperation between public, private, commercial parties. So I found it always quite interesting. So that led me kind of to go to urban studies. So that's my background originally. And my interest is mainly in governance planning in relation to a variety of topics. So that's the nice thing about cities, like it has to do with everything and it never gets boring. So, well, throughout the years, I've been working on kind of like a variety of projects, like from small scale to big scale. So like mobility visions or the Metropolitan Plan for Amsterdam 2050, but also like small scale projects like neighborhood urban designs. So, but at the moment I'm in Amsterdam, where I'm mainly working for the Municipality of Amsterdam in the research and strategy section of it's a big organizational structure. So that's within the urban and economic planning department, basically.
And for how long have you been there? It's quite a while now, right?
Yeah, so this is my 4th year, I think, at the municipality.
Not bad.
Yeah, it's 4 years now. And quite exciting times also, because there's so many things happening right now, and it's quite an exciting moment. So right now, at the moment, I'm working mainly on like spatial economic development strategies and also socio-economic vitality of neighborhoods. That's kind of where I'm now.
Was it always clear that you want to go to Amsterdam and pursue a career there, or was it kind of like by accident? You know, sometimes these things happen.
Life happens.
Yeah, well, Amsterdam was never the city that I was like so much interested in. I mean, it is a great city. It's a beautiful city. People like it. But Amsterdam was for me interesting in the sense that the land, so like from an urban planning perspective, that the land is owned by the municipality to 80%, which puts the public sector quite in a strong position. So back in my studies, I was curious about how does this work when the municipalities have such a big power. So that led me to Amsterdam, and then I kind of stayed because it was just a very dynamic and innovative environment to work in.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so partially by accident and partially on purpose.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So let's start with our first topic. As you know, with what we do at 2BX, we focus a lot on urban areas, right? And how technology can change the way we live and interact with urban areas, right? So quite a complex ecosystem. And what we're very curious about is to hear your thoughts on the core challenges that urban areas are facing at the moment, especially in Europe. I mean, there are so many things that are at the moment are happening. You already mentioned it. And we have a view on it, obviously, but even more curious to learn about your view from, let's say, your inside perspective on urban ecosystems.
As you said, like it's an extremely complex ecosystem. Well, I believe that right now we're kind of standing in interesting times where we're going through quite a lot of big transitions. And at the same time, there's a massive scarcity of space because we don't want to grow anymore and kind of destroy the landscape. We want to densify more. And at the same time, through all these big transitions, we have a massive stacking of ambitions. And to make it even more complicated, there's even more parties involved in the process of urban development, as we are kind of democratizing the urbanization process. So it's not top-down anymore. It's way more bottom-up in cooperation with the top-down.
When you say stacking of ambitions, could you elaborate a little bit more on that? What does it mean to you?
I mean, it's connected to the challenges that we have. So within Amsterdam, we have the ambition of greening the city. At the same time, we have the ambition for mixed neighborhoods. At the same time, we have the ambition of high densities. We have the ambition of the mobility transition. So all these challenges or ambitions, they have a spatial claim, basically. And these spatial claims are stacking up while the ground is kind of scarce, and we have to fit it in. So it's all negotiation, and it makes it extremely complex.
All right, that is very interesting. So to sum it up, scarcity of space is a huge challenge that urban areas face, right? Is that applicable to all urban areas, or would you say there are differences in Europe?
I mean, I believe that the Netherlands is kind of like the most extreme country in that sense, as it's one of the most densest countries in Europe. Then the Randstad, where we have The Hague, Rotterdam, Amsterdam, is extremely dense. Like I've been to Berlin and Leipzig recently, and then I was, especially in Leipzig, walking through the city, I was like, it's kind of empty here. And I was like realizing how dense actually Amsterdam and Rotterdam and The Hague is. Like you're constantly surrounded by people. But it's also like, if we look into the future, I believe that these challenges of densification will also come to other countries, as other countries also decide for not building into the landscape, but preserving the landscape, keeping it intact from a sustainability perspective, from biodiversity, and actually densifying the existing urban areas. So I think space will become scarce everywhere.
You mentioned in the Netherlands, it's quite a very dense already, right? But compared, for example, to some urban areas like Paris or Barcelona, where you have, I think, 5 times the density compared to Amsterdam or The Hague, this is still or is already a huge multiplier, right? Compared to that. And that is interesting to me, right? Because I think Paris can grow if they want to, right? They can grow into the land, into the rural areas, because there's nothing that limits them, right? Same applies to Berlin and a couple of other cities. And to me, I'm always wondering, is why do we have this need and this push to make it so dense? Why not make more public transport, more infrastructure, and to, relax it a little bit? Why would you say, like, in general, you want to be more dense? Is it only because you want to preserve nature? Because sometimes it seems to me that that cannot be the main reason, right?
Yeah. Well, speaking from the Amsterdam perspective, I mean, if you look at Paris, Berlin, those are extremely big cities. And if you look at the Randstad, it's more like you have smaller cities and in between the landscape, and then you have a very good mobility system. So you can live in Almere or Utrecht and work in Amsterdam. But everything in between could be also cities. So we would actually, if you look at the Randstad, it's kind of Paris, basically, but with the decision of keeping the landscape intact. So it's, at least from the Amsterdam perspective, it's really about keeping the landscape because there is not much land, basically.
But would you say that is the case in the other cities as well?
I would say yes. Like from a sustainability perspective, I think it's extremely important not to extend cities, but to kind of build within the boundaries. And because, for example, Berlin has a massive area that is built on, and it has actually quite a good mobility network there. It doesn't matter if you live there or there. And I think intensifying these areas makes sense from an environmental perspective.
So talking about cities with huge areas, right? In Berlin, we have this, I would say, already very polycentric concept, right? Because you have what is called Kiezes, right? So people in Kreuzberg, they usually go out in Kreuzberg and they live in Kreuzberg.
We always look at Berlin when talking about polycentricity, actually.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate? I mean, in Berlin, it's based out of the history, right? I think it's not a conceptual thing. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's built a lot around the history of the city, right? So, but from your urban planner's perspective, what can you take out of this concept of Berlin, and how can you implement it, let's say, even in a little bit more controlled or more in a planning view?
Well, maybe to put this up front, there's a huge difference in planning between Germany and the Netherlands. Like in the Netherlands, planning is deeply rooted in the culture. Like here, people had to plan things because it was just a swamp. So you had to plan things, you had to urbanize from a very big human impact to actually create cities at all. So this planning tradition and actually controlling things is very Dutch. Whereas the German history of city planning is not so much like urban planning came quite late in Germany. It was more of an organic growth where you had like middle-aged cities that slowly grew and that transformed over time. So putting that up front, Berlin grew. Berlin has an extremely complex history. And the result is this polycentric, crazy city that works like 10 cities in one city, which is amazing. And Amsterdam is kind of planned, like you can see the rings of the city, how it grew, and everything is planned out. So in the last vision Amsterdam did, the spatial concept was the extension of the center, because it was actually a monocentral city where the center was kind of the core of housing, the core of economic activities, and actually the outskirts were kind of almost segregated from the center. So the spatial concept was like the extension of the center. And now we're going more towards this polycentric idea from a more social perspective, that you want to enhance the neighborhoods in the outskirts and you want actually to make them economically stronger and to reduce also mobility in that sense, so that people can have their free time where they live, more like the Berlin model. So the Kiez typology is quite, something we look very much towards and try to kind of imitate it here in Amsterdam by putting a lot of investments in neighborhoods outside of the center.
And you described that in Berlin it happened kind of naturally, like by itself, without being planned. So what is the challenge now to plan that, to really make that happen somewhere else?
Yeah, well, there are kind of like different tools we're looking at. So like the base of this polycentric city is a good mobility network. So like in Amsterdam, the western part of the city is not connected by the metro, for example. So like the extension of the metro lines are one of the bases. And then the next steps is kind of like adding new housing, densifying those areas to add more mass to it, adding also functions to it, adding also economic activities. So you decentralize all the urban activities towards the outside.
Can you maybe give us, we're touching upon this complex environment and the interference of different challenges, yet interdependent challenges, right? A couple of times. Can you give us a good example? Where do you see constraints when it comes to density, climate change, biodiversity, like all the things you mentioned? Can you give us like a real life example that you've experienced where you'd say, look, this is just like a huge problem where we're running against a wall, or this is how we solved it actually? I think that would be great to hear. Yeah, and that does not have to be Amsterdam necessarily, right? It's like anything that comes on top of your mind.
Well, maybe to start, like when talking about challenges, I like to start with thinking in scales instead of thinking in topics. So it kind of breaks down the complexity and makes the challenges a bit more tangible. So you can think like in more global, national, regional, city, neighborhood, block building scale. By locating the topic you're working on, it becomes easier to understand actually the impact area where you can tackle the problem, but also understanding who you have to work with. So kind of like we see these big global transformations and trends and I believe like the three biggest ones are global warming, digitalization, and globalization. If we take, for example, global warming, which is a very global topic, we see then on the regional or city scale, that ecological sustainable development is kind of the core focal point coming out of this global transition. And then if we go down, like what we already talked about, is that urban growth is limited. And that results kind of like in a big jump in densities. So that translates again to a lower scale, where you're on the building scale. You get the complexity where you have to make urban blocks that are extremely complex, because they are high in density. At the same time, So that's kind of connected to another transition. At the same time, we want to make multifunctional, so not only housing, but also like amenities, working spaces. So that also has to fit into this block, while this block also has to be sustainable in the sense of like material usage, in the sense of like flexibility over time that the block can transform with its functions, but also that we want to give space for animals in our buildings, so that it's not only for humans, but it's also for animals where they can breathe in the facade, for example. So all these things kind of end up, I believe, on the building scale, where you have this block which has all these massive challenges, which is an architectural challenge, it's a construction challenge, it's a material challenge, but it's also a challenge like, how do you maintain this building during its lifespan? And I think technology actually plays a central role in that, in tackling this complexity. Like in the planning process, where you can tackle the complexity with like parametric design, for example. But during the lifespan, where you have maybe apps that contribute to management of the flexible spaces.
You actually mentioned like urban blocks that are highly complex. And this is something we want to like talk about with you. We all know that urban areas are highly complex environments with a lot of stakeholders involved. So unfortunately or luckily, depends, urban planners alone won't be able to solve the existing problems of cities, urban areas. So who else is needed and what for?
Yeah, so to maybe connect it again to the scale. So in every scale, you work with different stakeholders. So knowing your scale, you know your stakeholders kind of. And like from my experience so far, what I believe is that the role of governments will be kind of to lay out the long-term vision with very clear goals and strategies, in cooperation, of course, with other stakeholders in the city, but that there has to be an overreaching, very, very clear ambition and direction we're going. And then within that, I think the cooperation between the public, the private, and the commercial parties are extremely crucial. So I think the complexity and the challenges that we're facing, the public service does not have the capacity to tackle it. So we need all kinds of stakeholders, also like citizen groups, but also startups and tech solutions that can take up these challenges that are pointed out by the long-term visions. And at the same time, I believe it is crucial to start cooperation early and to have a direct link between public, private, and commercial parties, but in a structural way, not in a random way, which is often the case now, but to build cooperations between all these parties.
Would you share an example of like where that starting cooperation in an early phase went like pretty well?
That's a good question, where it went well, because it often doesn't go well, unfortunately. Well, one example which shows how it can go well and how it cannot go well, the topic around city scooters, like these electric ones. So the city has the ambition of becoming more green in mobility terms, so that we less car dependency, more biking. So you see these scooters in Brussels, in Berlin, and they are kind of a nice response to a need that is formulated from, it's also a call from the market, but it's also formulated by the vision from the city that we want to green the mobility. So that was a nice filling in, because that is something that the city cannot do, the public sector. So that was a nice filling in of these ambitions. In Amsterdam, that didn't go that well. We don't have these scooters, because we did have the ambition for more green mobility, but the cooperation wasn't created early enough, so that in the end, the city government decided that we are a biking city, and that it came too late, the call for these scooters. Otherwise, I believe that if the cooperation would have been searched earlier, there could have been new concepts how this mobility type could have been better integrated into the existing mobility system concept. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So again, it's kind of connected to what you said before, that the government has to have that long-time vision, and it has like, we are a biking city. So this was set in stone, kind of.
Yeah.
So,
and I think if the parties would have called and said, hey, but we have an alternative also, let's work together and let's see how we can combine these two, I believe that the cooperation would have been better.
Two little side notes. One thing that made me smile when I was in Amsterdam last time is that I could actually rent a boat via app, right? So this is something that exists there, where I would say...
I love that.
Yeah, I would say this is prototypical, right? For also a good example for how different cities comes with different needs. And I mean, there is an answer to the mobility problem that can only be solved that way in Amsterdam, I think.
Yeah.
On the other hand, what I was wondering, I mean, Amsterdam is a biking city, the whole Netherlands are, but ride-sharing services via app are rarely seen, right? It's just like our associate is in Amsterdam at the moment. He said he's traveling the country, and he said, yeah, you know, it's a pity because I cannot rent a bike because everybody has a bike. There are no bikes to rent here. It's kind of tough, like on-demand renting, right? That was at least his last experience, which I considered also very interesting.
Yeah, I think we have like a higher bike density than human density in Amsterdam. So everybody has 3 bikes, so we don't need to bike.
Okay, so Tanja, how many bikes do you have?
I'm down to 2 only. I used to have 4.
4? What do you do with 4 bikes?
Yeah,
Well, you have a nice city bike, you have a crappy city bike, then you have a weekend bike, and then you have a guest bike.
Yeah, it's like the Germans with cars, right? So this is,
Terrible, yes.
Okay, wait, Mark, how many cars do you have?
Yeah, I'm living in a city. None, obviously.
Uh-huh.
Right? Yeah, but
It's
I would
not
say
applicable here.
yeah, it's not. I'm not prototypical when it comes to that, I think.
Yeah, you are not prototypical in any way.
Maybe, Tanja, maybe one more thing. You mentioned that technology can play a huge role, right? Also in the challenges that you're facing. So if you could make a wish list, right? Just like write down whatever and we bring it to the magic tech wizard and he will fulfill your dreams. So what would you wish for in your day-to-day job or in the planning processes? Looking for, okay, we need this technological solution. It's simply not there. So just like be bold and wish for something.
So I work mainly in research stuff. So for me, it would be amazing. Yeah, I mean, it's being developed, but like a proper digital twin of the city where you have all the data, like spatial data, social data, economic data, and you can just, you know, click on whatever you want and then you have all the information. So like, yeah, a proper digital twin that's like... Phew.
Why do you think it's not there yet?
Maybe it's more about like that we don't have it, or like there's not a direct link between the tech and the people who are working on it.
I mean, especially when it comes to that, like I'm always wondering how to gather the data points. I mean, again, looking at Germany, we're a little bit more familiar with. We're looking at a couple of those companies, right? This is trying to digitize certain data points, social economic data points. Then you have the leg to specific real estate data points because you have different municipalities or also different units, right, being responsible for different data points. And there is at the moment, no chance that you can create transparency between those units and you can put the data points at one point, right? It's just like... Yeah. Very tough. I think there are countries where this is easier, right?
Yeah, like the Netherlands is one of those. Like data, you have this big topic around Datenschutz in Germany, which is, I mean, it's good, right? But it's also limiting when it comes to good insights, which, I mean, I also understand. But I believe that by seeking a direct cooperation between the public and the private, you could tackle this the Datenschutz problem, data security problem, that you have the public protection, but in cooperation with the private sector. I think that could be. But I mean, Germany is quite difficult when it comes to data. Like doing research in Germany is very, very. Like here in Amsterdam, we have crazy data months that are also like open access, that everybody can access, also like citizens, and it's just there.
That's pretty cool. I mean, that is a call to all the founders out there who are looking to build something in the space that you mentioned, right? So aggregating relevant data points, that means, okay, go to the Netherlands, build your product there, and then build from there towards other countries in Europe, right? Because, I mean, it is difficult, but it's good to hear that in the Netherlands, for example, you have the accessibility to relevant data points.
But probably, Mark, then a smart VC would say, hey, this is not like scalable because not every country is like the Netherlands. The data is like they are pretty present and available. Yeah.
But I think Germany is also working more and more. Like I've been looking into some research that is done in Berlin, and like they also say like the last 10 years have become better in terms of data accessibility. So I think, especially like in the democratization process of cities, this is a very big topic, the accessibility to data. So I think that's something that is scalable, basically.
Okay, so you would say, I mean, sooner or later, it's inevitable that every bigger municipality in Europe has to create decent data pools accessible to everyone to kind of like build upon that. That would be something you...
Yeah, Yeah, so not only for the commercial sector, but also for the private sector, where like Amsterdam has this ambition, for example, for making cities together. Like it's one of the 5 strategic goals. And part of that is opening the development process for everyone, so that you as a citizen, but also as a commercial party, can contribute and can take active part in urban development. So I think that's a big development.
So listening to what you said, probably then Amsterdam would pay for that kind of solution and invest money in that.
I think so, yes. I mean, we do have some small, like we have a chief technology office within the municipality, and they are working a lot with data.
Well, you have what?
A chief technology officer, a CTO.
In the municipality?
I love that.
No way.
We also have a CSO, a chief science officer. So we have all these. The municipality works quite interestingly. Like it's built up as a business, but it's a public body.
Oh, that could be a whole new episode. Let's not.
But I mean, let's do one thing here. So everyone who listens to that, who knows any other city outside the Netherlands who has a CTO, let us know. We want to talk to this person. We want to talk to the CTO of a city. This would be, I think, something really amazing for us. So if anybody knows a CTO of a city, please introduce us. Would love to hear and have a discussion around basically the job description.
Before jumping to the next topic, I have one question when it comes to blind spots, because there are a few blind spots or black spots. So what do you think are possible blind spots urban planners might have or startups might have?
What I'm seeing is that the focus is very, very strongly on ecological sustainability, which makes sense, right? It's kind of a very urgent topic. But I believe that planners, designers, I'm not sure for startups, I don't have such a good insight there. I think the blind spot is social sustainability, that we, in this whole transition, ecological sustainability transition, we have a blind spot for the affordability of these things, of taking everybody along. And I mean, it's more of a political question, but it has a spatial impact. So to give an example, like looking at the urban, because it's my specialty, looking at urban economies and this whole knowledge economy transition, there's less and less space for industry and for manufacturing jobs. So what we see in Amsterdam is that the working landscape is homogenizing extremely, because we are investing so much in knowledge economy that is driving for the sustainability transition. So I believe that looking also into how to create the balance between ecological and social sustainability is something that we have to think about better.
Yeah, super interesting. We would totally agree. We're nodding heads here. No one can see that, but it's
Yeah, I mean, it's the S and the G in ESG that is often very small compared to the E at the moment, right? So this is just because there is so much focus on environmental sustainability, we have the strong opinion that one cannot exist without the other, right? So without social stability and social sustainability, no environmental sustainability, right? But let's talk a little bit. We've been talking about a lot of how cities are built, what is out there, what are the challenges. And now we want to focus a little bit on the concepts that are out there to solve those challenges. And I mean, it's not so much from a broader sense what is out there, but I would be very interested in hearing what is the most interesting concept that you have encountered so far. Is it the 10-minute city? Is it the super blocks in Barcelona? So what is it where you said, whoa, this is pretty damn cool?
Yeah, there are several ones.
Of course they are.
I mean, what I find very, very interesting is kind of how you organize mobility flows in cities. So Amsterdam is going for this autolu concept, where we kind of get out the cars out of the city almost everywhere, and where they are staying, it's 30 kilometers per hour. That's something that is, I think, going to be happening in the next 5 years. So you have this huge transition, and you have this one building or one building stone that is crucial for this transition, and that is called hubs. They are these multifunctional, crazy buildings where you kind of get there. You rent a car to get out of the city, you get a bike to get into the city, but you also pick up your package because logistics is also limited to the city. At the same time, you can also change to railways, to public transportation. So it's like this crazy multifunctional building that is extremely complex. That kind of is the magic box of solving the mobility transition.
That is very interesting. Are you only doing this in Amsterdam, or are other cities also pursuing this idea in the same manner?
I think you have them in multiple cities. I think Paris is also working on these kind of concepts. Fun fact, Amsterdam has been working on it for 5-6 years and nothing is happening because it's extremely complicated. So because you also it's a question of who organizes it, who's the driving stakeholder in it, who's financing it. That's a huge problem because these buildings are extremely complex. How do you combine mobility as a service parties together with the public transportation? So it's a lot of governance, but it's also in this building that just has to where you have cars coming in from the bottom. On top, you have, I don't know, maybe drones coming out one day. And so, yeah.
But that sounds like a concept where you kind of want to move people in the inner city and out of the city again. But that to me sounds a little bit like longer ways, right? What is with concepts that are again, and now we're touching upon the polycentric idea, but I want to challenge a little bit. In the real polycentric city, would I need such hubs? Or is it kind of contradictory?
Well, making the city car-free is not only for the city center, it's for the whole city.
Okay.
So we created this concept of the SMLXL hubs. So you have regional hubs, then you have city hubs that are along the main net transportation circle, which are connected to the outer neighborhoods and the inner neighborhoods, because Amsterdam has this two-sidedness. Berlin is more complex in that sense. And then you have neighborhood hubs. So you have different typology of hubs which serve different functions, but the core of them is this mobility and logistics. So moving goods and people around the city and transitioning them from one scale to another. And also you have then the switch to another mobility mode. So it's also very important for the polycentric development, I believe.
I have perhaps a delicate follow-up question here, because you mentioned it's hard to decide who has to should finance that kind of projects that are so important. You mentioned that it's crucial. So in your very personal opinion, who should finance it?
I think it's the central government that has to finance these things, because cities are they're creating living spaces for the whole country. It's not only for the city themselves, but they're kind of tackling the housing problematic of a whole country. So Netherlands has to build, I don't know how many houses, and 50% of it is landing in Amsterdam. And that is bringing all kinds of transitions with it. So I believe that to a big part, the central government has to finance these kind of projects, because cities cannot tackle this alone financially.
But what is with private players? I mean, there could be the opportunity to say, okay, look, we're only allowing new buildings on that particular ground, right? If you're a real estate developer, you have to build a hub, right? Because that's the only concept that we will allow for your building permit here, right? So this is something that you could also do, right, to finance it, to kind of incentivize heavily the private sector through either regulation or subsidies.
Yeah, I mean, how Amsterdam is incentivizing private stakeholders is because we have a land lease system. So, for example, there we have our own intentions. We have it, for example, for stacked productive spaces. We are planning to reduce the land lease to incentivize developers to invest in these kind of projects. With the hubs, it's a bit more difficult because there's no direct profit from it. We cannot find a party that is interested in doing it.
That is interesting, because that also sounds like something that I think startup founders, not necessarily pure tech players, could solve, but find an operating model for those hubs that actually shows interesting returns could also be something. I mean, we're looking at those things over and over again. Partially, for example, on the storage side, right, we're invested into Starbucks, very active in Austria and Germany and Switzerland, right? So that already goes into the direction, at least logistically, when it comes to this micro hubs, right? So they're working with IKEA, for example, to distribute your sofa and stuff like that. This is a very interesting concept. But so they found a model to kind of really monetize, or in a proper way, a part of this solution, right? And then there are others. So I think if you put some thoughts together in that space, a very good model can be found, right? To operate such hubs, not only for society, but also from a profitability standpoint.
Yeah. The biggest problem or the biggest challenge with logistics and mobility is that the landscape is extremely fragmented. So I believe if there's concepts that is trying to kind of bring together almost like a white box concepts where you bring together all the flows coming into the city, and going into the city that you have this transformation, the fragmentation that is tackled. So I believe like startups in that sense, which have a building concept together with a management concept where you bring these things together, I think that's extremely needed.
All right, Tanja. Unfortunately, we have to come to the end. And Mark and I, we love to end the episodes with a quick fire round. So it's all about speed and gut feeling here, okay? Just about 60 seconds for 10 questions. Are you ready for that?
Okay, yeah.
Okay, then I'll kick it off. Build new or modernize?
Can it be both?
What if not?
Modernize. Yeah.
Bike or public transport?
Bike.
Functional or aesthetic architecture?
Functional.
High-rise or low-rise building?
High-rise. This is so difficult. It's like every time it's like both, but combination, not black and white.
This is what it is about, right? A little bit of black and whiteness here. Okay, app or pen and paper?
Digital pen?
That's okay. That's okay.
Urban or rural area?
Urban, definitely.
Environmental or social impact?
Social.
Mobility on demand or urban logistics?
Urban logistics.
Work from home or from the office?
Office.
EV or hydrogen?
Hydrogen.
And one last from my side. Should cities ban cars, yes or no?
Yes.
Yeah, agree.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so
really
much.
enjoyed having you here at the Urban Tech VC. So Thank you for your time.
Thank you. It was nice talking to you and nice to see what you guys are busy with and continue the good work. It's nice.
Thank you very much. We'll definitely keep in touch.
And now we know that cities can have a CTO.
That is the biggest takeaway.
This is
obviously.
so cool.
Yeah, this is so cool.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Urban Tech VC, a podcast for urban leaders shaping the cities of tomorrow. If you love our show, do drop us a review, share it with your friends, and follow 2BX on LinkedIn or Instagram. And if you are about to raise a round, drop us a note at LinkedIn or via email at idea@2bx.vc. Let's have a talk and see where we can help.